Welcome back to another episode of Growing Guelph. Today I'm speaking all about food, dignity, and local impact with Tom Armitage. Tom is the manager of The Seed, a program of the Guelph Community Health Centre. The Seed is an innovative nonprofit that's working hard to make good food accessible to everybody in Guelph. From community markets to meal programs and social enterprise models, The Seed is rethinking how we tackle food insecurity and doing it in a way that centers dignity, equity, and collaboration. We'll hear how Tom's journey led him here, what The Seed is up to today, and how each of us can play a part in building a more food-secure Guelph. Before I dive in, just a quick thanks for staying subscribed to this podcast throughout the last few months. Apologies for the lack of episodes. Between my job ramping up to full-time busyness, the holidays, and just life, I had to put the podcast on the back burner for a little bit, but I've got several interviews banked, no plans to stop in the future, so please stay tuned for more inspiring conversations across Guelph. And now to my conversation with Tom. Today on the Growing Guelph podcast, I'm joined by Tom Armitage. Thanks so much for joining me today on the show. I know I'm excited to talk all things The Seed, but just sort of to kick things off, can we start with your story and what led you to this work? Maybe a little bit about your background and what path kind of brought you to lead The Seed here in Guelph?
Sure. So I guess it's kind of a long story, but not really in the end, where just out of high school, I started to do a diploma program in computer graphics and technical production and finished that diploma and chose to go in that program in the first place because, when you're in high school, you kind of develop hobbies, and I was really interested in graphic design and 3D animation, all that kind of thing at that time. So I went ahead and did that, but then once I had completed it, it was really at the tail end of the .com bubble when I had done that.
Was that like the 2000, 2001?
It was
when
right
that
around there, yeah.
bubble?
Yeah, so I graduated 2003.
Okay.
And so the bubble had already burst, and I also just found that I wasn't too keen to do it as a means of employment.
Yeah.
I just thought, it's really fun to do this type of thing, to create graphics and modify images, that kind of thing, for friends, and create posters for things that are going on and that kind of thing. But I didn't want to do it as a career. So then I just decided to go back and work in the warehouse that I was working in prior to going to college, and did that for years. Just allowed myself to have the freedom to pay off student loans first and foremost, but then just take my time and figure out what it is that I actually want to do for a career. So fast forwarding a few years after that, I really started to say, okay, I should probably pick something at some point. And just went through like a reflection process at that time where organic food was becoming a little more popular as well in retail stores. And, I wanted to know more about that. Like, what is this versus that? And understand that from a production standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint, all of that kind of thing. So as I dug more into that, I got more interested in production, and I thought, okay, well, maybe like agriculture is something that I should look into. And growing up in Waterloo, it wasn't something that you learn about in school, and certainly it's not a career path that your guidance counselor is telling you about. But I had experiences on my grandmother's farm. I was really interested in the production side of things, so I thought I'm going to do some courses and just dip a toe into agriculture and see where that takes me. So I took a class through Nova Scotia Agricultural College around organic farming, and I loved it. So I ended up doing a full certificate program. Then I thought I should learn how to actually produce food, now that I know the basis behind it all. So I did an internship on a transition to organic farm in Nova Scotia. And then from that point, I was like, I really enjoyed the hands-on labor side of things, but I also really want to know more about the science behind all of this too. So then I enrolled at U of G and did a Bachelor of Science in Organic Agriculture. And then alongside that, during the summers, I was part of a small social enterprise here in Guelph called Backyard Bounty, where we were growing food in people's backyards, and we were selling at the market through a CSA share and to restaurants.
That's very
all
cool.
the food we produced there.
So
yeah, it was
when did you go back for your degree in, sorry, what was that at the University of Guelph?
organic agriculture.
Organic agriculture?
Hmm.
If you don't mind me asking, just because I went to Guelph for biology, so I'm wondering if there was any overlap there. Like roughly when were you doing
I
that?
did that in 2010 through, I graduated that program in early 2013.
Okay, so
Yeah.
our time at University of Guelph would have almost totally overlapped. I started my undergraduate in 2009.
Right.
Yeah, so
That's great.
that's fun. I'm sure we passed each other more than once
We may have.
around campus and that. Did you enjoy your time at Guelph, like, and kind of
Yeah.
jumping right into that world?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it so much so that when I was doing the backyard farming side of things, I was also really contemplating the inequality of access to food that I was producing with this business, and really wanted to know more about why inequality exists. Why does somebody's income dictate what they can consume? So I had taken a food security course with Evan Fraser at the University of Guelph, and like really honed in on the subjects we were talking about within that course as something that I wanted to pursue further. So I just approached him and talked about the types of things I'm considering and the work that I've done to that point, and asked him if he's looking for any more students, and thankfully he was. So he took me on as a master's student, and I did a MA in geography under his supervision. When I finished that, it just happened to coincide with this project called The Seed that was very early days, and they were looking for somebody to get the pilot started, basically.
So it kind of worked out in terms of stars aligning when you needed them to.
I was fortunate that way for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess some of the things that you were interested in learning about, those are some of the kind of like biggest, not the biggest things plaguing humanity, but like up there, right? Like the inequality of access to healthy food, and kind of what some of the outcomes of what some of the capitalist systems that are in place, and learning how that sort of plays out on a real level, like on the ground. Yeah, the real world impacts of those systems. So were you, I don't want to use the word radicalized, but was learning a lot of this, like, did it really, like, what was the shift in your thinking in terms of these are big problems that need like very new ways of thinking and like net new systems that we don't have in place now to try to tackle? Can you maybe speak to that a little bit? Like, just, well, I guess like radicalization is a good word for it, in that you start to learn like, oh, wait a second, like these are just bigger foundational cracks in our society and what it sort of can represent. Like, did you have any of that experience while learning?
Yeah, I would shy away from the word radicalization.
Yeah, I
itself,
guess
but
you're right.
at
The word
same
radical,
time,
there's a lot of baggage in that. I just mean like when you learn that, and it could be radicalization in that when I say radical, I mean that bold new ideas will be needed to solve things, because doing just like the business as usual has yielded usual results. And radical in terms of rethinking like new, like, new technologies that we have with us, new ways of bringing people together, and new methods for distributing food that aren't just on the traditional methods, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, there's definitely always been a sense of within me, after having studied these things, going back to that time, just a lack of acceptance that the status quo is what the status quo should be,
Yeah.
where it was and is obvious that there are structural things in place that result in people facing poverty,
Yeah.
that don't necessarily need to be that way. So then just getting a better understanding of the intersection of policy, food production, food distribution, everything involved within the food system, having a better understanding of each of the avenues in which people either access it or don't, was really helpful in just understanding what could be done about the issues. So then when I got the opportunity to be a part of the Seed as a consultant in the early days, looking at the consolidation of cold storage and distribution for a network of food agencies that were seeking to improve the amount and types and quality of the food they were receiving, I got to see firsthand what it is that were limitations for them. So just going back a little bit on that part of the story, at that time, around 2013, 2014, there was some research done here in Guelph around the way that people access food, particularly food access programs. What's their experience like, and is there anything that they have concerns about? Just really understanding what it is, what their experience is like. So they were talking about the quality of the food being not great, having to identify the fact that they were facing poverty in some way, whether it was providing rent slips or proof that they're on social assistance, things like that. And then they also talked about the quality of the food they were receiving. So a network of agencies that provide these services got together to say, we should do something about this, and what is it that we can do? And since they were operating out of church basements, portables, just really small spaces that weren't set up for warehousing, they thought the first step in improving the amount and quality of the food that they're receiving would be to centralize cold storage and distribution.
Yeah.
So that's where the seed got its formation from. And then I was hired as a consultant, as I mentioned, to get that thing started up. So I learned about the barriers to their work and asked questions about where donated food was already coming from. Do they have connections with places that they need to turn away because they can't accept it, because they don't have the infrastructure in place? Where are they getting their food from currently? So then one of those opportunities in knowing about the food system that was a benefit was I knew that they were purchasing food from retail stores because they were sharing that information with me. And then I said, well, what if every one of us got together and purchased collectively? The seed could go further up the supply chain, reduce the cost of food overall, save you time and energy as well in terms of food acquisition. We would be the central storage for it, and that could form a basis of basically like a financial basis for the seed's operations that could support the donated side of food. And the trick to it that I shared with them was if we're buying collectively and the seed takes a margin on the purchases, there would be costs that we could offset as a result of having that margin. So that's where that social enterprise kind of model came from. And that's that financial foundation that we layered donated food on top of.
It's interesting how these problems are, at the end of the day, logistical issues, right? And they're largely like when we talk about, like, for example, food waste. It sounds like I think people have these ideas of like, food waste is such an issue and it's caused by like ... And then it could be anything from like individual choices of, buying food, not properly planning and things like that. But at the end of the day, like, food is a resource that rapidly expires and it's worth something. And then every day past its like best date, it rapidly loses value, and anything you want to do with it will cost money and cost energy. Like, so even if you're a nonprofit and you're not trying to make money off of that food, you still need to put money into keeping it cool. If you're trying to store it, you need to pay for that, like the storage of wherever you're keeping it. The transportation of it like burns fuel one way or another to get it from A to B. Like, and then that's doable earlier in the food chain because there's these big like economic forces that are each taking their cut. But it becomes, like you said, like it becomes such a challenge to solve that last little bit of, and even just saying, it's that last little bit of food. Like, no, that's not what it is. There's a lot that goes into it and clearly solving these problems and tackling these it takes a lot of people like yourself who have to come from those different backgrounds, like having, like you said, you worked in a warehouse and you worked in, like, you come from those different backgrounds, and then you can combine it with like the other fields of study that you like learned about. And yeah, I just think that's really interesting, and that these problems are so big and that tackling them does take a lot of outside the box thinking. And I think it's just a good reminder that sometimes things are not solvable because the solutions require a lot of unique, like, little individual efforts, and it takes a lot of effort to rally enough people to make those little changes, to make those efforts, to put the systems in place. Yeah, so I don't really have a question from that. It's just interesting to think about the logistics of the solving complex solutions like this. I think that to put in a nutshell of everything I just said, I think that that's true of a lot of complex problems in our society, like whether it's housing or whether it's whatever. Like these things get people very upset, and a lot of us will look out in the world and try to agree that there are these problems, but the solutions are rarely going to be simple. They're not going to be cheap. They're going to take a lot of collective effort and a lot of unique ways of solving them, which I think is just a good reminder for people. If someone's promising you a very easy, simple solution to something, it's probably too good to be true.
It could be. And so I think within all of that, like our work in combination with all of the other partners that we have in Guelph, Wellington, Dufferin, all of the work that happens in Waterloo region, in the GTA, across Ontario and Canada, there's tons of effort that goes into increasing people's access to nutritious food that is way under what the actual need is. And so when we talk about simple solutions, like a simple solution is not to just like maintain what we've accomplished as a collective here. It's to do something more than that.
Right.
So when you look at the root cause of food insecurity, that's where it becomes a bit more simplified, where it's an income-based issue. People simply just don't have enough money to afford the food they need to be well.
Right.
So why don't they have enough money? It really varies based on individual, but it could be somebody's lost their job, so they're in between employment, and then employment insurance isn't high enough to maintain their cost of living. There's been tons of inflation that's happened over the last 5 years, so the cost of living has just gone through the roof. And embedded within that are like inflexible costs like housing, where you have to pay rent to live where you live, or pay your mortgage to live where you live. And if those increase and your income doesn't keep pace with that, the only places that you can make sacrifices are more of the variable costs like food.
Yeah.
So then people start to sacrifice the quantity of food that they consume as a result of that.
Which is tricky because then it's a flexible part of your budget, but it does have knockdown effects on your health, on your energy levels, on your, like, even just socially having to say no to, like, if all your friends tend to do a lot of socializing at restaurants and bars and you have to say no to that more often, then you lose out on some of those social situations, which can, if we know people who are isolated are more vulnerable in a number of different ways, right? So yeah, those issues can kind of just compound on each other.
Yeah, poverty is very isolating, because if you think about all the places, like you mentioned a couple, but all the places that a person might frequent, oftentimes it involves some kind of financial transaction.
Yeah.
You know, there's few exceptions: public parks, libraries, places like that. So it can be isolating, and you can feel excluded as a result of your income, which doesn't really seem fair.
Something that we should get to, just in case a listener is listening and probably has an idea of what the seed does just from this conversation, but can you describe to listeners exactly like what the seed is today and what it accomplishes?
Yeah, for sure. So I described a bit about our wholesale program. So that's where we've established that collective buying program as a social enterprise that supports the collection and distribution of donated food as well. So within that program, we have roughly 45 different food access agencies that we're helping to support, many of whom are purchasing through us, but then also accessing the donated food free of charge. And then we have roughly 65 schools within Guelph, Wellington, and Dufferin that we're distributing food to as well through the paid side of our wholesale program. And within that program itself, last year we distributed $2.2 million in donated food through that network. And this year, combined between what people are purchasing and the donated food side of things, we're looking at probably $3.5 million in food that's moving through our warehouse just through that wholesale program on its own.
Wow.
But we also, like, what's been great about having that program as a foundation is it required us to have warehousing, coolers, freezers, trucks as well. Once you have those kind of resources in place, you start to look at what other gaps exist in food access in our community. So we know that food insecurity is an income-based issue, and we know that people's incomes exist on a spectrum. So using this principle, we created a program called Seed Markets. They're sliding scale markets where people can pay anywhere from the landed cost that we've paid for it. So if we paid $1 for something, the public can buy that same thing for $1, anywhere up to the retail value of that food. So we run it as a market in person on Fridays at 20 Shelldale, Saturdays at the Guelph Farmers Market. And basically we have about 60 different products roughly, fruits and vegetables mainly, that people can buy on a sliding scale. So they just show up, they load up the basket with whatever they like. When they come to the till, they're able to choose a discount category that would get them all the way down to the lowest cost we have, or select a few steps in between, or just decide I don't need a discount, I can pay full retail rate for that food. So the beauty behind that concept, which we've also applied to an online grocery store, is that it involves the whole community in the solution here. So there's people from all socioeconomic backgrounds who can participate in this work and access their food through the seed. And with that online grocery store, I mentioned the donated food earlier, we're also putting donated food onto the store for people to select from as well. So all of those products, we have no idea what we're getting in a given week, but it's all basically sorted through, itemized, described, and then uploaded to the store. So we're maintaining a high degree of quality for the products that are going on there. So they can select through the free food section of the store, and it is like it is. It's free. If it says it's free, and then they can pay on a sliding scale as well for anything that's outside of those free categories. And it's across all nutritional categories for our online store. And then people can shop online and choose pickup locations. So we have pickups on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays that people can choose from. So those are two of the more like public-facing social enterprise models that we've deployed. But then we also have a program called Fresh Food Prescribing. And the idea behind this is that the seed is a program of the Guelph Community Health Centre. And as a result of that, we're connected very well to dietitians, social workers, doctors, nurse practitioners, people who work in healthcare, who are client-facing. And so the initial principle going back about 7 years now was that a lot of the clients of the health center are facing poverty and have poor access to nutritious food. So could these healthcare providers prescribe food to them?
Right.
And then if the answer to that is yes, how does that actually function?
So if your doctor says like, oh, I think we're seeing some, consequences of not having enough fruits and vegetables, like if you're lacking vitamin C, for example, then they could recognize that in the patient, and then prescribe them in the situation where like, oh, there's a program available through the seed. You're able to get access to, say, boxes of oranges or XYZ vegetable, or I guess in this case, oranges would make most sense, at a sliding scale kind of thing.
It works similarly, but the way the prescription works is so we're buying food on behalf of them, so we need external funding to cover the cost of those prescriptions. But when they're referred to the program, we're able to give them $15 per person in their household per week for 52 weeks. And the reason why we do it by household is that it's a household income issue, food insecurity is. So if the client presents as food insecure, in all likelihood, everyone within that household is also food insecure. So it would be inequitable, and it just wouldn't be great for us to only prescribe to the client and not the rest of the household.
Right.
So we give it to everyone in the household, and then they're able to redeem those vouchers we give them on our online store or in person at our markets. And it gives them access to a substantial amount of food because they're also accessing all of our food that we have online or in person at our lowest cost, which if you were to compare our wholesale pricing against retail, like that's a good 33% or 50%, it depends on the product, additional that they're able to get through us because our margins are just not there. We've sold it or they're redeeming it at the landed cost that we have.
And you're able to accomplish some of those very slim to no margins in some situations where organizations have donated like warehouse space to you, and or people who work and volunteer for you donate their time and things like that, right? Is that, like, aside from the bigger ways about how the company is or the organization is set up. Is that true? Like in terms of like, yeah, how you're able to set it up?
Yeah, so there's a few things we're reliant on to meet our outcomes that we wouldn't be able to do any of the work that we do if any one of these things didn't exist. So volunteerism is huge.
Mm-hmm.
We're celebrating our 10th anniversary in October, and I sent out an email to all active volunteers of the Seed, an invitation, and that was 130 people who are actively volunteering with us right now.
Wow.
So you can imagine the amount of hours and good times that we have together, achieving these outcomes that if we didn't have volunteerism, we wouldn't be able to do any of the work that we do.
Yeah.
And then secondly, like it's the financial thing as a whole is reliant on external funding, so foundation funding, government grants, local grants like United Way and others, and then there's private donations as well. So we're pulling together, financial support from a broad category of opportunities.
And I guess even like at the markets, you talked about the sliding scale that people can choose like what they're comfortable with, and that has the added benefit of being like a donation in some ways, voluntary donations that people can make. And when you were talking about that, I was also thinking that has the added benefit of bringing in people of all different like incomes into to use an organization, and that can help reduce some of the stigma for people if they feel like, I mean, in any sort of situation like that where an organization is trying to alleviate some of the symptoms of poverty, people can feel reluctant because of there's the visual stigma of like, oh, what if I'm seen going there and everyone knows that, only people who use that are people who, like the stereotypes and things like that. Because like, I know that can just be such a huge barrier for people because of the way our culture stigmatizes poverty as being a personal choice, like a personal failing, which I think I probably don't need to convince you of this, and probably not the listeners, but it's rarely it's almost never entirely a personal failing. And if you're someone like me who kind of thinks in systems and less, thinks that the systems are the most important part and the individual choices are just sort of the consequences of those symptoms or of those systems, then yeah, it's almost like there's we sometimes pretend, like I think that blaming personal choice for like blaming people's poverty on their personal choice is just a coping mechanism of pretending like a broken system isn't broken.
Yeah, and I think a great example of how it's not true, it's not a personal failing, is that there are people that work multiple jobs and still need to make sacrifices on the quality and quantity of food that they consume.
Yeah,
So
in a world where you can, I mean, I think a lot of people think this too, that 40 hours a week is already a lot to sacrifice just for the right to exist, but people are finding 40 hours at a lot of jobs certainly aren't able to. You're not going to be thriving in like with inflation and how things have gone, but to have to be working multiple full-time jobs to just still be scraping by, and then you're still vulnerable if your check engine light comes on in your car that month suddenly while you were in the green, big unexpected bill happens, and now people are once again set back and feeling that financial crunch. And we talk and colloquially we joke about like, oh, people will survive on like ramen noodles and things like that, and that sort of mentality, it almost is like it's easy to laugh off and be like, oh yeah, like when we're young and you're in your early 20s or something like that, there's like, oh, we survived on this, and it's a point of pride for people, but that becomes less and less of a funny anecdote and a funny story when you're talking about like people trying to support their young kids or their like parents, or like the realities of poverty and the realities of growing up food insecure and in households where calories are being counted not for like dietary reasons but for strictly like need to track everything to afford. I think that's just a level of stress that's hard to convey and hard to, like, the freedom from that stress that the seed is able to provide for so many people is now they can spend a little more time trying to think about, like, maybe like with the hierarchy of needs, you can alleviate some of that food insecurity, and they can focus on their educational needs. Then they can focus on, like, just, living and spending time together, enjoying their time together, and not feeling that stress. That's got to be a big empowering factor. I know, like, both for yourself and for other people who work with the seed, right? Is that something that motivates you every day, like the knowledge of what you're doing and
It
how
is
it's
for
impacting
sure.
people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like it was a main driver for following this as a career path in the
Yeah.
first place was like I came at the food system from more of a, I wouldn't say selfish way, but like I was thinking about these things for myself, like wanting to know more about organic food and how is food produced, and obviously that's something important to know, but it was about me, and then kind of turning that on its head just prior to starting that master's program, and then always thinking outwardly, what is the impact of this on others?
I guess that's the nature of, you're describing it as sort of like a thinking about yourself, but that's kind of the purpose of education, right? Like, you spend a bunch of time arming yourself and equipping yourself with knowledge so that you can then kind of turn around and make an impact with that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So you've talked a little bit about how you studied organic agriculture as well as, like, social enterprise. Do you know why exactly food security became your focus? Or was there a particular moment or experience that kind of solidified the direction that you've taken your career in?
Yeah, I guess I would just take it right back to that urban farming experience.
Yeah.
So selling at the farmers market through community supported agriculture program and to restaurants, and like loving that work so much. I would love to go back and do it again. But at the same time, just like as we were making these sales and creating these connections and greeting people who purchased our food in some way, whether they were buying the share and picking it up or at the market, and just knowing there is a massive number of people who can't access that food, just didn't sit well with me, and I wanted to know why that was and see if there was anything that I could contribute to in terms of solutions to that problem. So I would say like that summer in late 2012, probably a turning point for me in terms of setting me on the path that I'm on right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of those sorts of things are only apparent in retrospect too. Like, I'm sure at the time it just sort of felt like the natural progression of what you were doing and what you were interested in. But that is interesting that you can kind of go back and almost pinpoint it to a particular summer. So the Seed is both a nonprofit and a social enterprise. How do you balance those roles? Are there any challenges or advantages in operating at that intersection?
Yeah, there'd be a few things to consider within that. So the SEED is a program of the Guelph Community Health Centre, and the health centre is a registered charity. So there are charitable rules and regulations that we need to follow. So that comes into play when people make private donations, and we're able to issue tax receipts, things of that nature. But then when running the social enterprises that we run, we need to ensure that the activities that we're undertaking lead toward the vision of the charity, right? So the vision of the Seed is a community where everyone has enough good food to eat. And then the vision of the health center, which we're a program of, is a community without barriers to health and well-being. So then we always see all of our activities as contributing to that ultimate vision, because without food, you don't have well-being.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful pathway that we have from one vision to the other. So then as long as we're reinvesting any social enterprise income back into that mission and vision, we're okay to do so. And I think like one of the advantages of running a social enterprise, I would say, is that it can attract a broader audience to your work that perhaps might not have a way to engage with your work. So if a person wanted to support the Seed but didn't have the financial means to donate, or they didn't have the available time because they're very busy to volunteer, and they would like to purchase food through us, that gives them an opportunity to contribute to our work in a way that perhaps they wouldn't be able to otherwise if we were simply a program that gave food away only, versus having the additional option of people purchasing food. So it opens up a new network of people to be involved in our work. And then going back to your earlier point about stigmatizing experiences, that's one of the beautiful things about having people of all socioeconomic backgrounds come to participate in our work, is that there's no telling what your income is, what their income is.
Yeah.
We're all coming to the same place, and we take a lot of pride in the experience that people have with us as well. So it's very difficult to market programs as a nonprofit because marketing budgets are astronomical, in the private sector, which we don't have access to, and we don't want to spend our donated dollars and enterprise income on that.
Yeah.
So we rely heavily on returning customer bases and word of mouth for people that are paying retail for the food that they buy. So if they have a good experience, that will encourage them to come back. So we can't just rest on the values that we share, because if they have a poor experience, sure, they believe in our mission, but they had a poor experience, they're not going to come back.
I should say here, where I'm not necessarily and completely unknown to the Seed or unbiased with my work with the Salvation Army that I'm doing right now. I am the person on the team who goes to the Seed on Wednesdays and picks up our orders. So I've spent a fair bit of time in the warehouse and things like that, but just as a person picking up. But I will say that pretty much everyone I've met on the Seed team is just always very enthusiastic to be there, enthusiastic to help. I don't know what the selection process is in terms of hiring or selecting people to be in those front-facing roles, but you're doing something right there, because everyone just makes the Wednesday better. Yeah, I always just leave with such a nice feeling that these tricky logistical societal issues are solvable. They're solvable when people who care put their time and effort towards things, and there's something really endearing and bolstering about getting to interact with that element of it.
That's beautiful feedback. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think it, similar to what I said about the market experience or our online grocery store experience for people who can choose to pay for their food anywhere. With staff, obviously we have our mission and shared values, but you can't rest on that either. You want to have a good work environment that's very supportive, and just have space for people to be themselves there and enjoy their time. Throw music on in the warehouse because it's a drab place, but we have a lot of fun regardless.
It's amazing just how much better working environments can be when people have that mentality, instead of just if the bottom line is the income or the money that's generated, and every decision has to be viewed through that lens, instead of viewing it like, hey, these are human people who are choosing to spend their time here. How can we make the environment nicer? And they'll want to spend more time here, and they'll have better quality. They'll have better quality experiences, and have the people using the program will So it's good that's front of mind. That's apparent from being there that people care. And I can relate to what you were saying about spending marketing in a nonprofit world. I was once the marketing and communications manager of a nonprofit organization, and it's a really tricky place to be in, because with modern marketing spending, it almost feels like your only good options to really reach people are throwing money at social media companies, and that I just don't think that ecosystem is very healthy right now, because, well, for one, they're all these American companies that you have to throw money at, and then just kind of hope that you tell them who you're trying to reach, and you can reach people that way, but having to deal with just such a big, and I think a lot of us have specific issues with some of these social media companies and what they're doing with their power, so it can feel icky when you're trying to do something for an organization that you has a mission you believe in, and to reach people, you kind of have to filter it through these big corporations just to get eyeballs on your venture and what you're doing.
We're big believer in community building.
Yeah.
So like volunteerism, for instance, many of our volunteers have been referred to us by friends who were volunteering already.
Right.
So then similarly, like what does our reach look like if we were to go, boosting posts on social media versus relying on word of mouth and our reputation as a
Yeah.
great place to volunteer, to participate, to donate to. It feels like the latter route is the route to go in terms of small scale community building.
And I know I've had this conversation when talking to other organizations and like that thrive on Guelph's very healthy base of that volunteerism energy. It's like no stranger that like Hillside, for example, can be as vibrant as it is because there's all these volunteers that give so much to make that festival possible. It's an interesting place to play in because like I think Guelph does have a reputation as being a place that has like a strong volunteerism base, and in some ways that ability for us to do so as a city is a privilege because even just people being able to volunteer shows that they have some form of security in their life, like either they're supported through other work or they're retired or in whatever way they have that ability to give, which is good for us as a city. And it shows probably that like some of the wealth of the city in that way. But that said, not every city that has that wealth has that volunteerism attitude and that there. So I think I think that's an interesting how much public good is able to be done through the will of the people who step up in Guelph and make those things possible. And you were kind of just saying that like there is a lot of overlap there, like organizations sharing volunteers and that word of mouth through volunteers, and that it's a really interesting resource. I almost wanted to use the word economy to describe it, but I guess that might be sacrilege a little bit, but you know what I mean? Like there's that.
It's just something that exists in parallel with the economy, right? Like
Yeah,
it's outside of it,
exactly.
but parallel.
And it's doing important work that we value as a society, but doesn't have monetary value necessarily. I mean, in some cases, I'm sure it does. Like volunteers probably could be getting paid for work that they do that they're choosing to volunteer, but it's one of those like it's sad that it's required, but it's bolstering that it is here in ample numbers when organizations like the Seed look out for volunteers, right?
Yeah, I think like if you view the work of say alternative food networks in general as an alternative to mainstream approaches to food work or food access, when you have volunteerism that supports all of that, it's nice to think about it differently. So not thinking of it as in economic terms, just thinking about it in community terms.
Yeah.
So like this is a little world that we're building that has a lot of strength and value and connectivity amongst it that exists, and it's like almost like a dream scenario that if more people had the availability in terms of schedules and stuff like that, they would probably make similar choices to come and be part of a collective space doing something.
I think what you just said is there's a lot that goes into it, especially that part of divorcing things from their like economic, like and we sort of touched upon this before, but like the value that something can bring outside of the economic impact it has. And I think Guelph as a city is able to recognize that, but it's a challenge in just the way our society is set up in a lot of ways, where that economic value is front and center, the thing that is focused on. Is that ever a challenge for you, like in terms of when you're advocating for the Seed and for these organizations that trying to get people who have the levers of power to sort of shift their thinking in those spaces and to like communicate like the message you just did, I think effectively to me, but obviously you've learned to you're good at communicating this, but is that something that you've had to like a skill that you've had to work on and that you've kind of grown into over time?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I've had to grow into and cultivate.
Yeah.
I like when we talked about my story earlier, a big part of my own personal growth is that I would have been very uncomfortable doing this 15 years ago, and would shy away from presentations, shy away from public speaking. I would get nervous for days leading up to points where I had to do any of those things.
Yeah.
Whereas now, don't. And I'm fine doing these types of things and speaking in front of large audiences.
Am I right to guess that some of that comfort was just through kind of trial by fire, like being thrown into situations where you have to do something, and then you kind of realize that it's fine, like you get through it, and it's okay. And
yeah, it's very much like that.
Yeah.
Like it's just the more and more exposure you have to these types of things, the more comfortable you can get with them.
Yeah. I'm sure
I
a
don't know
lot
if
of
that's
listeners.
true for everyone, but
Yeah.
it was true for me at the very least.
I know I've probably in a similar space to you where it's very there's something very ironic about saying like, oh, public speaking makes me nervous too, as I say that into a microphone that I'm purposely recording and then publishing. But it's true that these things that if you're a listener and you feel like, oh, I wish I could do this or I could do that, but feel like you're held back by these insecurities, like, and I've said this on so many episodes, but like, that's okay. Performance, like sometimes the hardest thing is to just do it while feeling scared. And that's sort of the trick, is that the people you see out there like speaking and doing, like, there is some maybe small percentage of them that just have no fear and don't actually face that. But I'd say the majority of them are just doing it while scared. Mm-hmm. And if you do it while scared enough, the fear starts to simmer down and it starts to not be as loud in your brain, and you don't think about it or fixate it leading up to the event as much, because you've been through that before, and it's okay. And yeah, some of that like bravery is just maybe the only time you can be brave is when you're afraid. So
Absolutely.
We've already talked quite a bit about food security, and I had a question for you about what are the root causes of food insecurity. And I guess we already kind of discussed that it's the challenges of income. This is a sort of a sideways question, but I've heard people sort of just speaking about different concepts about, as people are facing food insecurity and inflation, and that seems wild, and people are upset that the economic forces that be enrich certain people in these situations. And I've heard people talking about, like, should we explore like cooperative grocery stores again and things like that. Do you have any like opinions on that? Like, where outside of the seed, but things that, you would be in favor of in terms of changes to how we currently think, like, getting food on people's tables?
Yeah, I think my career is an example that I do believe that.
Yeah, of course.
Having run an urban farming company and then a nonprofit network of social enterprises under the umbrella of the Seed. But I've also read a bit about cooperative grocery stores as well. Because there was a really interesting book written by John Steinman, I believe his name was, called A Grocery Story. And it looks at the history of grocery stores in Canada, going back to the 1800s or so, and then the relatively slow, perhaps rapid consolidation of ownership of grocery stores across the nation over the last 150 years or so. And he looks at co-ops in particular as pretty viable alternative to that consolidation of grocery chains. So it was a really interesting book, and he, if you follow him on LinkedIn, you'll see that he travels to different co-ops around North America. So it's really interesting to see his viewpoint and see examples of what exists out there in terms of that model. And then, I had high hopes for community-supported agriculture and direct-to-farm access. So I hope that that remains part of the alternative food network going forward as well.
There are interesting possibilities that technology opens up in this space, that for people who can be, if things like that can make you optimistic about the future, there is some interesting potential spaces that this could go. Like, for example, right now we're at an interesting place when it comes to like manufacturing and at home manufacturing because of the proliferation of 3D printing technology. And that's making some people sort of think like, okay, well, what if there was a world where if people have the means to produce the material goods that they need at their house, then that does sort of upend a lot of our traditional thinking of like going to the store and buying a thing. And if there's a world where, society keeps on kicking and we get the linear progression of technology, then something like a food replicator, like from the Star Trek universe, that is technology that could be scalable to a size where, like, instead of there's one, like for example with the synthetic meat place, I think there's an interesting space where you make your own burgers at home using your like a 3D printer essentially. And I think those sorts of spaces have really interesting possibilities of like food insecurity and where things could go when things that are done in traditional means, we kind of flip them on their head. But
yeah, I think you're bringing up like a whole subset of what goes into the availability of food, and that's technology.
Yes.
So if you look back to the agricultural revolution, where the amount of wheat we were able to harvest just through genetic mutations over time, it was led to astronomical results, right? Where like the amount of food available in the world just ballooned seemingly overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And then like there are additional things that people are attempting to do today that are working out very well for more remote growing, so container gardening,
right?
Where they're taking shipping containers and growing food underneath UV lights as well.
Yeah, and right now, so many of our crops are like specifically, I'd say created, but specifically bred to work well, meaning like produce high yields in a great big like monocropping situation. But that's not to say that we couldn't tailor make and fiddle with the genetics of our food so that you could really have some of the intermixed like true like garden kind of setups where different species, different varieties of things grow better together. And like they I'm not doing a great job of explaining this, but basically like instead of having a field that's just nothing but corn, you can interspace exactly how the plants are grown so that they like protect each other and they benefit each other, and like they don't step on each other in terms of like they kind of share resources and they play nice together. And then you've got these, you could really increase the yield of what's actually produced like at home or in these setups. And
yeah, there's a great book on that. The production technique is intercropping.
Yes, thank you.
So the book is called Carrots Love Tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you great examples that people mainly use in home gardens, but could be used at scale. You have limited land available. You need to consider access to light and water.
Mm-hmm.
What pairings do you have that would work well? And then there's also plants that wouldn't work well together too. So it tells you how to avoid those ones.
I wonder if on a long enough scale, it's almost like we've gone from sort of individualized farms where like the majority of the population works in agriculture and is producing enough to feed themselves and a little bit of surplus, to this middle area where we're currently at, where the farms consolidate down. It takes a huge amount of resources and capital to even run your own farm, and the technology that you need to put into it to producing the yields of modern farms and like everything about modern agriculture. And then we're approaching a future where because of like the further embracing of those technologies, it goes back to a place where we're not relying on giant farms that produce all the food for everyone, but people are able to produce what they need through like really well, like you said, the intercropping systems of like backyard farming and things like that. I don't know if that's fully possible because there's a lot of calories that humanity needs overall, but I think it's an interesting idea that of where things could go, at least in some places and for some food requirements.
Yeah, I mean, like, and then there are places where like growing your own food doesn't make all that much sense unless you're focused on what the land and amount of light you have
Yeah.
is in consideration. So it makes more sense as a dairy farm.
Yeah.
So like playing to your strengths in the areas in which you're trying to produce food, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Because there are places that would otherwise be deserts that are pulling water from ancient aquifers just to make it a corn farm.
Yeah.
Kilometers and kilometers of corn that wouldn't grow there if they weren't pulling aquifers from thousands of kilometers away.
Right. It feels like we could do an entire digression on just agriculture. You're like I've worked in agriculture, so I feel like I've got a wide variety of things I know. But modern agriculture is very interesting. I think people have a lot of anxiety and worries about their food and things like that. And having worked in the more traditional agriculture spaces, there can be a tendency to villainize some of that fear in people. And I've always tried to maintain to when I'm dealing with people who have the more traditional outlook on agriculture, that hey, the public is susceptible to anti-GMO stuff because they've been so far removed from their food production, and food production has gotten so complex in terms of the inputs and the markets that go around it, and that there's so much unknown that in people's minds that unknown just gets filled with the what ifs, right? And the boogeymans of the unknown, what are they doing to my food? But really it's just because people care. They wouldn't have that fear if they didn't care.
Yeah,
So
and through the seed we do our best not to make any values judgments based on what people want to consume.
yeah.
So we got our start focused on fruit and veg, but then started to branch out into all different nutritional categories of food, and then really started to layer on top more and more donated food. And when you're receiving in a lot of donated food, sometimes there can be things that are not the most nutritionally sound items. It might be caramel popcorn that comes in.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we want to improve people's access to nutritious food. And at the same time, if we get that caramel popcorn in, if people want it, they're welcome to it.
Yeah.
It's not our focus, but it's coming in, and we want to make it available because there's a lot to be said about being able to access something like that too, because you want to relax and enjoy something. Maybe it's your dessert, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's free to us, it's free to them to choose from. So we just make it available. We don't obviously throw it out.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to waste food either, but we don't judge people based on their choices.
That's good. And like you said, with or as we've talked about, food is such a there's so many cultural choices that go into food, and even then the individual choices of what people find comforting and what they find. Even just food it's a bedrock of people's nutrition and health, but it's also a source of joy, and I think you're able to take that full spectrum look at what food really means to people, instead of just saying we're going to be narrowly focused on just the nutritious calories for people, because it's bigger than that. It's a bigger topic.
Exactly.
So what's on the horizon for the seed? Is there any upcoming initiatives or long-term goals that you're especially excited about?
Yeah. So we're celebrating our 10th anniversary on October 2nd. We're still also looking for some volunteers as of September. What day is it today? 16th.
Today's the 16th.
Yeah.
This episode might not be out for a few weeks, so a little bit closer to your to the date there. But if you're listening to this after the fact, I'm sure there's still many opportunities to get involved and volunteer, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then on the longer term horizon, we've gone through pretty substantial growth over the last few years, where when we really nailed down the programs that we're running and decided this is the array that makes the most sense for the resources we have, for what the community need is, we really started to push more to get more donated food into that system. So a few years ago, we got up to $700,000 in donated food. The next year was $1.2 million. Then the year after that was $2.2 million. and we're going to repeat that again this year in all likelihood. So there's been a huge growth curve there that like we feel we can sustain that. Of course, it's very reliant on external funding to be able to do that work. But there's other elements that we would love to see grow as well. So I described our fresh food prescribing program earlier, and we feel like there's a great opportunity for growth there, where we're trying to, well, we have embedded it within the healthcare system that we have access to at the health center, and we're growing it to other contexts through the University of Guelph and through a partnership with East Wellington Community Services and the East Wellington Family Health Team that will demonstrate that we can scale a program of this nature. And perhaps this is the way to increase people's access to food through the healthcare system, rather than relying on it simply being an afterthought through the current food access system that we have.
Yeah. That's very cool, and it could almost be like a foundational example of how to run a program like that, province-wide, Canada-wide. Yeah, I guess there's no limit if enough other people take notice and can learn from the good work that you're doing. So yeah, I guess finally, if people are listening and they're sold on the vision of the seed, how can they get involved? Whether through volunteering, donating, or just learning more, where do you direct people in that energy?
Yeah, so they could go to theseedguelph.ca. I think the header in the menu is Join the Movement. So if people are able to follow that, they'll be able to find out how to donate, volunteer, or participate in our programs.
Perfect. Well, it sounds like there's a lot to be proud of and a lot to be excited about in the future. Thanks so much for joining me today and talking about all things the seed. Hopefully, congrats on the decade of 10 years of the seed, and maybe we'll be back to chat in a few years to talk about all the cool things that you've done between then and now. Thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Growing Guelph. I've been your host, Jordan Sloggett. Be sure to subscribe to us on social media, on your favorite podcast app, and if you have a recommendation for a future guest you'd like me to speak to, you can reach out to me at growingguelph@gmail.com.